Released in 1989, The Fly 2 continues on the story from its predecessor, where Veronica gives birth to Martin Brundle, the son of Seth Brundle, who genetically fused his DNA with a fly. Veronica dies during the labour, where Anton Bartok, who owns the Bartok company that Seth worked for, brings Martin up in the Bartok facility. Martin, due to his enhanced genetics passed on from his father, grows at a rapid rate, whereat by the age of 5, Martin has the growth and development of a 25-year-old, where he continues to work on his father's teleportation pods, and also starts a romance with fellow Bartok employee Beth. However, Martin starts to change, where it becomes apparent that he's going through a metamorphosis and will transform into a giant fly. Martin also learns that Bartok plans to use Martin's genetically modified body, as well as the pod's ability to genetically alter and mutate DNA for profit, where Martin and Beth go on the run to try and get away from the evil Bartok company, with Martin hoping that he can find a cure. So it's time to explore this underrated and worthy sequel, as we look into 10 things that you didn't know about The Fly 2. So, let's check it out. Number 10, from makeup artist to director. After The Fly turned out to be very successful both critically and commercially, 20th Century Fox, along with Mel Brooks' company, Brooks Films, immediately greenlit a sequel. In fact, 20th Century Fox was so keen for a sequel, one movie that was in their slot of movies to be released had its production shut down. So 20th Century Fox instead had The Fly 2 take that movie's spot. So The Fly 2's production was really forced very quickly. So in other words, there was going to be a Fly 2 no matter what. Original director David Cronenberg was unable to come back, as he was working on other projects at the time. However, there are also claims that he didn't like The Fly 2's script and that's why he didn't return. IMDb also claims that Sam Raimi was considered to direct, thanks to his work on the Evil Dead movies, but 20th Century Fox thought that the script that he and his brother had worked on was too weird. So Chris Walas, who worked on the creature and makeup effects on the first movie, was offered the chance to direct. This was on the account that during filming the first movie, Walas was part of a lot of the technicalities during filming, due to the technology of his effects. So really, he was a huge influence of the creative process of that film. Round about this time, Walas was also contacted by Steven Spielberg, who wanted him to work on the creature effects for Gremlins 2, as Walas also created the Gremlins for the first movie. So Walas did something that not many people do in the movie industry, or at least back then, which is shrug off Steven Spielberg and instead decided to take on the job of directing The Fly 2. Number 9, original script. So the original script for The Fly 2 was very different to the final film that we got. There are some theories that The Fly 2 was originally about cloning, and was to see the return of the Seth Brundle character. Walas himself said that the script was about family, even referring to it as a kids' film, with it being about a young boy and his relationship with a bug monster. Walas didn't like the script and didn't even know how to turn it into a movie, finding it to be unfilmable. So he took his concerns to the higher-ups at 20th Century Fox, telling them that he does not want to direct The Fly 2. And so thankfully the studio agreed that the script should be changed. So Frank Darabont was hired to do rewrites to the script, after Walas saw the Blob remake, which Darabont had also co-written. And yes, without a doubt, the Blob remake is a brilliant movie, which, like The Fly, took a 1950s concept into a new, terrifying, updated 1980s version. Darabont also co-wrote the script for A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, and would go on to direct the Stephen King adaptations of The Shawshank Redemption and The Green Mile. Also, another co-writer for The Fly 2 was Mick Garris, who is also a super horror movie maestro, having directed Sleepwalkers and the original Stand miniseries, as well as co-writing Hocus Pocus. The script for The Fly 2 actually had similarities to the sequel to the original Fly, Return of the Fly, which came out in 1959, as both movies focus on the son of the main protagonist from the original, and both movies have a human antagonist, and both movies have a happy ending, where our main characters are seemingly cured from their fly ailments. Number 8. Casting. When it came to casting Martin Brundle, the genetically enhanced son of Seth Brundle, Chris Walas wanted someone who could look like the offspring of both Geena Davis and Jeff Goldblum, and his original choice was Vincent D'Onofrio. D'Onofrio came in and did a screen test, and the test was sent to 20th Century Fox, who simply said no. Supposedly, other young actors who were popular at the time were also considered, including Keanu Reeves, who supposedly hated the script, and Josh Brolin. Eric Stoltz got the part thanks to his roles in popular movies like Mask and Some Kind of Wonderful. Walas said that he liked working with Stoltz, and that he gave a good performance, along with other tales about his reputation of being a method actor, as while on the set, Stoltz insisted that everyone called him Martin, with Martin even being printed on the actor's chair. Daphne Zuniga, who played the part of Beth Logan, Martin's caring love interest, got the part because the Fly 2's producer Mel Brooks had previously worked with her on Spaceballs and really wanted to work with her again, and thought that she would be great for the part. John Getz is the only actor to return from the original, where he once again plays Stathis. Walas said that what he loved the most about Getz is the scene where he yells at Martin not to sit in a particular chair, without any explanation given as to why, just adding to the odd eccentricities of the character. And character actor Lee Richardson plays Anton Bartok, the owner of the sinister company that owns the telepods that Seth had built, whom had been manipulating Martin Brundle and acts as the movie's main villain. There are some claims that Bartok is the Fly's answer to the Wayland Company in the Alien movies. However, the original script for the first Fly featured the boss of the company that Seth was building the pods for, who also acted as a villainous antagonist, so the Bartok character could have just been a leftover from that. The two main leads of Eric Stoltz and Daphne Zuniga were younger than the leads seen in The Fly 1, with Eric Stoltz in particular being popular among the teenage audience, having starred in several popular high school movies. Walas described The Fly 2 as being more of a date movie, in that it's a movie that the teenage market will take their dates to see. And yes, The Fly 2 does feel more like a teen movie, or at least a young person's movie. Number 7. Casting Seth and Veronica. Remember how I said that John Getz is the only actor from the original Fly to return? Well, this isn't technically true, as Jeff Goldblum does somewhat return for The Fly 2, where Martin finds an old tape of his father explaining how he feels that going through the telepod has energized his body. This footage was an outtake from the first Fly movie, a scene that ultimately wasn't used, although I've also heard some suggestions that this was Goldblum's screen test. The scene in question was actually refilmed as that scene with Seth and Veronica in the cafe, where Seth speaks of how he feels energized, only in that scene Goldblum is more wired and energetic. The Fly 2 starts with the Veronica character giving birth to Martin, and as you can clearly see, that's not Geena Davis. According to director Chris Walas, when it came time to filming The Fly 2, Davis was up for returning and reprising her role, but didn't want to film a birthing scene, as she hated filming the infamous birthing scene in the dream sequence in the original. And so, considering The Fly 2 did involve a birthing scene, she didn't return. So instead, Canadian voice actress Saffron Henderson took on the small role of Veronica, who is literally just shown at the start of the movie to very quickly get killed off. And yes, she looks and sounds absolutely nothing like Geena Davis. Sorry about that, but yeah, it's true. Even the first movie's director David Cronenberg has something of a Fly 2 cameo, when his book The Shape of Rage is seen in the movie. Number 6. Special Effects. Filming of The Fly 2 was to take place at Toronto, Canada, just like the first movie. However, filming of The Fly 2 required bigger sound stages that Toronto just didn't have, so filming took place in Vancouver, British Columbia. Because Chris Walas was the movie's director, meant that he couldn't work on the movie's creature effects or makeup. In fact, Walas said that he found not being able to be in charge of the special effects while filming to be really hard. Instead, the effects were provided by Wayless's company, the CWI. And although I find the effects to be very impressive, and not something that I would easily find faults with, I just don't think the effects were quite as shocking or as captivating as the original. When you see something ghastly or hideous in the first movie, it really hits you and it stays with you. When you see something similar in The Fly 2, it just doesn't have the same brutal, lasting impact. The fly creature in The Fly 2 looks very different too. Whereas the first one looked like an abomination, the second one looks like a natural metamorphosis to a brand new species, something brand new that was grown from the first movie. And yeah, look, sadly to me, it does kind of look like a generic movie monster. The teleportation pods that were used for the first movie were destroyed, so new ones were built, and even they looked, well, a little off. For some reason, they made the inside of the pods yellow, and it just doesn't look right. The green effects seen in Fly 2's credits were actually originally created for the first Fly, but ultimately never used. Look, I'm not putting down the effects for The Fly 2, but I just feel like they needed Chris Wayless's touch, and I think that special effects is where his true talent lies. We also see the fly creature a lot more in The Fly 2, which makes it feel like a monster movie, as opposed to the first movie which feels like a tragic observation into body horror. And even Chris Wayless himself referred to The Fly 2 as a monster movie, so there was a kind of shift in mood and tone, going from a gory, tragic art house love story to a date night drive-in monster movie. Speaking of the effects of The Fly 2, don't even get me started on that dog scene, where Martin discovers that his childhood dog is reduced to a pathetic mutant creature, where he then spares it. Man, that scene really hurt me in the feels and left me traumatized. Even director Chris Wayless said that you don't hurt a dog when he found out about the scene, but The Fly 2 went and did it anyway. And yeah, it's a really shocking and really sad moment. Number 5, getting past the censors. The Fly 2 was originally hit with an X rating, and it was all thanks to one shot in the movie, a scene where a Bartok guard gets his head crushed by an elevator during the movie's standoff climax with the giant Martin fly creature. Director Chris Wayless really campaigned to keep that scene in the film, and for it to also get an R rating. But that one shot seemed to really upset the MPAA. Wayless believed that it could have hit a raw nerve with them, as maybe they thought the scene looked a little bit too much like an industrial accident, one that could happen at any industrial workplace. But regardless, Wayless fought hard and insisted that that death scene is the big shot of the movie and must be left in there. And thankfully, after his campaigning, the scene was left intact and The Fly 2 was given the less restrictive R rating. Number 4, sequel. Even though The Fly 2 wraps everything up pretty conclusively, over the years there have been talks and whispers of more sequels and reboots emerging from the Fly franchise. However, there already was a direct sequel to The Fly 2, with the comic book series The Fly Outbreak. The comic series began in 2015 and was published by IDW, in which Martin Brundle tries to cure Bartok after turning him into a mutated abomination at the end of The Fly 2, and in doing so, unknowingly unleashes a genetic outbreak. I personally haven't read the comics, but from many of the online reviews that I've read, claim that the story is okay. Nothing too brilliant, but okay. However, a lot of these reviews claim that the artwork is pretty sensational, with The Fly Outbreak being just as icky and as gooey as the two movies that preceded it. So if you have ever wanted to see a continuation with the Fly movies, it does exist, in the form of the Fly Outbreak comic series, and in failing that, there is always the Fly Opera, which I mentioned in my Fly 1 episode. Number 3, deleted scenes. So there are two Fly 2 scenes that didn't make it into the final cut. One involves Martin and Beth visiting a burger restaurant while on the run from the Bartok company, where a car full of kids are making fun of Martin, where Martin then sprays a heap of his fly vomit at the car to shut the kids up. Yeah, it's pretty gross but pretty funny at the same time. This scene was designed to be a more comical moment, as it happens in the point of the movie where things get really serious, and director Chris Wayless really liked the scene, but kind of knew that it wouldn't make it into the final film, and was still a little disappointed when it was cut. The other deleted scene is an alternative ending, which sees Martin and Beth hanging out outside the boathouse, where Beth asks Martin how he feels, where he replies much better. And the scene ends with showing a fly on the food that Beth had prepared, as if suggesting the fly curse may not be over yet. As I mentioned when talking about the alternative endings for the first Fly movie, the ending we got is much better, where we see a mutant Bartok being reduced to being like the dog creature we saw earlier in the film, as it's so shocking and leaves a lasting impression. And even though he's the villain, you still can't help feeling sorry for this thing, which definitely makes the movie go out with a bang. This other ending kind of ends on something on a slower note. It just isn't as effective. Wayless actually really didn't like this scene, and when the test screenings feedback came back revealing that the audience didn't like this ending, it was cut out. Which was a relief to Chris Wayless, as, yeah, he really did not like that particular ending. Can't blame him. Number 2, marketing. When it came time to marketing the Fly2, Chris Wayless had hoped that they wouldn't use the obvious like father like son tagline. And of course, when he paid a visit to 20th Century Fox, he had discovered that they were using the obvious like father like son phrase. And it was everywhere. It was on the movie's poster and featured in the trailers. I guess they really wanted it out there that this movie was about Seth Brundle's son. Although it seems like a really obvious tagline to use, I actually don't mind it, to be honest. I mean, what else could they have used? Still be afraid? Still be very afraid? I don't know. There was an early teaser trailer that was put together, which is really weird, which doesn't show you any clips from the actual movie, but rather footage and audio recordings specifically made for the trailer, where we just see a heart monitor while hearing the cries and screams of Veronica, who is in labour giving birth to Martin, while we hear doctors trying to reassure her. I guess there was no footage from the movie itself available, and this was to inform viewers that Veronica was having her baby that we learned about in the first movie, of which would be the main focus point of this movie. Number 1. The Fly2 couldn't relive the magic of its predecessor. The Fly2 was released in February 1989 and made $38.9 million on an undisclosed budget. That was a huge drop in numbers considering the first movie made over $60 million. Likewise, it also didn't get the same level of praise that the first movie got, with critics complaining that although it has similar gooey gross-out moments the first movie had, it just couldn't capture the same level of intensity as that first movie, with it being called dull, with clumsy special effects, along with a script that just falls apart. It was generally felt that the movie didn't have the intellect of the first movie, so it just dives into gross-out territory for gross-out sakes. Even though the movie didn't do too well, I think it's also important to keep in mind, in 1989, The Fly2 had a lot of competition, as that year saw an onslaught of franchise movies, including Ghostbusters 2, Back to the Future 2, Lethal Weapon 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, The Karate Kid 3, License to Kill, Star Trek 5, Friday the 13th 8, A Nightmare on Elm Street 5, and of course the impossibly popular Batman. Chris Wayless did however say The Fly2 was very popular in Europe, and even saved a cinema chain in Germany, and according to IMDb, some theatres had nurses on standby in case audiences felt sick from all the gross icky moments. I personally think The Fly2 is actually quite underrated. It's a competently made movie that does continue on the story from the first movie, while taking the formula to different directions. Now, is it as good or as memorable as the first Fly? Well, no. That movie was a classic and a masterpiece, and no sequel was ever going to top that. But The Fly2 sure does try with plenty of heart and gusto. It's in no way a terrible sequel, and I do have a lot of fun with it. And it also has some great acting performances, particularly from Eric Stoltz, who you can see when watching it, he has fully engulfed himself in the character. And what I really like about it is that he doesn't do a Jeff Goldblum impersonation, but rather his own unique thing, delivering his own quirks. Now, if you'd rather the story just end with the ending of the first movie, then that's fine. We'll always have that brilliant film. And if you want, that's where your interpretation of the Fly universe ends. But if you want to see a continuation, then there is always The Fly 2. And to be honest, although it doesn't live up to the first movie, it is still a worthy sequel. The Fly 2 definitely feels like it's trying to be more of a fun popcorn movie, a monster movie, unlike the emotional experience which the first one was. And to me, that's okay having that alternative take, as it's not just a copy and paste of that first film. The Fly 2 is more like, hey, let's just sit back and enjoy these gross effects, and see this big fly monster kill people. I can understand huge fans of the first movie to be disappointed, but I don't mind as it's a different movie. So if you haven't seen The Fly 2 before, just don't go in expecting it to be exactly the same as the first movie. And if you do so, you should get some enjoyment out of it. Anyway, I'm Minty, and I've got to fly. See ya!